Persona 5 was one of my most anticipated games of 2017, and I'm actually really glad to say that it lives up to pretty much every expectation I had for it. So much so that I decided to make my very first video review just because of how good it was. I just felt like I had to say something about it. So, without further ado, let's jump into the review. Starting with the game's presentation, it's probably one of my favorite PS4 games and PS3 games in terms of visuals. Mostly because I kind of like games that are not as hyper-realistic. You know, kind of like Ni no Kuni is a good example of that on PS3. So even though Persona 5 does not push the hardware to its limits like games like Uncharted do or The Last of Us, it looks really phenomenal because it just has such a good, well-designed art style for everything, from like the character art to the battle menus to a lot of the effects used to the cutscenes. It just is a really well-designed game from a visual design point, even if it doesn't like wow from a technical standpoint. Like it's not 60 FPS, for example. The music is also really good. It's probably my favorite soundtrack in the series, and I like Persona 4's soundtrack quite a bit, and Persona 3 for that matter. I don't think the highs that I've heard of the Persona 5 soundtrack reach the same levels as the highs of the Persona 3 soundtrack, but I would say overall, it's a more consistently good soundtrack than Persona 3. The one issue I have with the game's presentation is the voice acting. Now, I don't blame the actors because I like a lot of the other actors in different roles, and I guess I've read various things that imply that the directing was weird for this game, but there's some weird delivery from some of the characters that doesn't seem to really fit. But that's like the only real gripe I have for the game's presentation. On the whole, it's really good. Regarding the story, at the 25-hour mark, it's probably better than Persona 4 or Persona 3. Though I have to actually reserve judgment because Persona 4's story is really good once it reaches a certain point. Persona 3 has a really good story throughout, if you ask me. So I'll have to wait and see if Persona 5 actually tops it, but at least in terms of my enjoyment, at this early point in the game, I'm about a fourth of the way through, I'm enjoying it more than Persona 4 and Persona 3. That being said, there is actually one thing I don't like about the story of this game already, and it's that the story is told out of order. The game starts with a sequence apparently from the middle, from what I can tell, and then cuts back in like a flashback to earlier events, and it sort of periodically cuts back to the present day section, and that's not a film technique or a game technique or whatever you want to call it that I really appreciate. It's called in media res. That's just a minor thing. On the whole, the game is really good, but I would have preferred if the game was actually told in order rather than jumping around. One thing I did notice though, even if I'm not really crazy with how the story is presented, is, and I've talked to other people about this too, and they agree, that this game probably has the strongest cast of any game in the series, because Persona 3 and Persona 4 both had characters that were like kind of not well received, but I feel like the reception for all of the characters is really solid. And speaking personally, there's only like one character that I don't connect to, and I don't even dislike the character, I just don't connect with the character at all. But for the most part, the characters are really good. And one very brief mention of this, the villains kind of suck though, because the villains are portrayed as very evil, at least at this point in the game, so they're very one-sided in terms of like black and white, good and evil kind of thing. Where I kind of wish there were more shades of gray, more conflicted, rather than just being all evil. Moving on to gameplay, I would actually say that this is the place to start if you're just getting into Persona, if you don't mind making Persona 3 and Persona 4 look really primitive, that is. There are actually a lot of tutorials, and it's kind of excessive sometimes. Especially for fans, I wish they gave the option to skip tutorials if you're a returning player, but because it's the fastest selling Persona, and I know a bunch of people who are like, this is my first Persona, I can give this game a free pass because this is like the first time Persona's really gone mainstream, so having so many tutorials and being kind of hand-holding isn't necessarily a bad thing in this case. Anyway, the gameplay actually works very similar to Persona 3 or Persona 4, where you have sort of social aspects, and you also have like traditional turn-based RPG aspects. Starting with the former, you have to go to school, you have to learn in class, you have to boost a bunch of things like charm and proficiency, like in Persona 3 and Persona 4, and you can also raise social links. So that part of the game is relatively unchanged, other than the fact that social links have been renamed to confidants. They work exactly the same way though, so don't worry about that. Now the big gameplay change was with dungeon gameplay, or the turn-based RPG gameplay. You have, in past games, certain labyrinths or dungeons or whatever you want to call them, that are randomly generated, where like every time you go up a floor, it's a new layout every time you go through this place. That's gone in this game for the most part. The palaces, as they're called, are very structured, like they're a fixed layout, and it's kind of an interesting touch. It's not bad per se, but it's just different, and I'm enjoying it because it is different. It's a lot more fresh than, say, Persona 3 and Persona 4, which did the randomly generated dungeons. It feels more like you're having to actually learn a layout for a heist, which I think is kind of the point, because you are Phantom Thieves after all. Even though the palaces aren't randomly generated, there is actually still one area that is: Mementos. Mementos is a substitute of sorts to the traditional Persona dungeon. It's kind of like Tartarus in that it's this long series of floors with enemies, and all the floors are random, and apparently you can meet Reaper, so it is very much like Tartarus in a lot of ways. In this mode, you actually play as Morgana, who can transform into a bus, but the bus controls just like any other character, so it's just a superficial kind of thing. The main point of Tartarus, though, is that you can actually do requests. The side quest system in this game is more based around solving people's problems in the real world by defeating people's shadow counterparts. I like the change. I personally was not crazy about the fetch quest nature of Persona 3 and 4, so this is a totally welcome addition to me. Of course, one of the staples of the Persona series is the press turn system, which if you hit an enemy weakness, elemental or physical, you can actually get another attack. Now this system has been overhauled rather significantly. First of all, if you hit an enemy with 2 strong attacks in a row, you cannot stun them. This took a lot of time to get used to because I was trying to like stun enemies and you aren't able to anymore. The other big difference is you have a lot more commands now. You have a bunch of new types. You have a gun now, as I previously mentioned, which is its own type of weakness. You also have the classes of Psychokinesis and Nuclear Magic, which have their own corresponding weaknesses. In addition, Bless and Curse, which were insta-kill before, have spells that actually just do normal damage. So the press turn system is a lot more versatile than it used to be, which is a welcome addition, really. One area that has seen a significant overhaul is the all-out attack system. In the previous games, if you hit all of the enemy's weaknesses and staggered them all, you could do an all-out attack, which would do a lot of damage to all characters as long as everyone was able to, like, if all the party members were alive and they weren't like stunned from status effects or whatever, they can all join into this one attack and just sort of do massive damage to all enemies on screen. That is still there, but it's actually augmented by another system. The negotiation system from Shin Megami Tensei actually appears in this game if you stagger all enemies, and if you weaken enemies enough, and if enemies are of a certain type. In this game, there are enemies that are timid, and sometimes they will automatically yield if you do enough damage to them. But for the most part, to actually get enemies in a position to negotiate, you have to get them into a position where you have to all-out attack. You can use negotiations to get items or money, or you can even recruit the enemies, like the main series Shin Megami Tensei games. So I find this a really fascinating way to get new personas. I'm not entirely crazy about it. I kind of wish they had left in the existing system of like the cards from Persona 3 and 4. But it's not terrible, it's just I kind of wish they had both. Minor nitpicks aside, the combat system is really good. It's the best in the series by far. And it's probably the most flexible and most strategic because you can't actually dizzy enemies anymore. So you actually have to plan out moves and timing everything a lot more so than I would say Persona 4, Persona 3. And those are my thoughts on the game after about 25 hours. It really took me by surprise. I knew I'd like the game because I love Persona 3 and Persona 4, but this game is really good. If you are a fan of the series, I would highly recommend this game. If you are a PS4 or PS3 owner and you have never tried Persona or you couldn't get into 4, I would say you should definitely give this one a shot because it's a very different feel to it than Persona 4. It feels a lot more mature in terms of its themes and characters. Although I can't really make a solid judgment until after I finish the game. Right now, my enjoyment level for Persona 5 is actually on par with that of Breath of the Wild. Both are my favorite games of the year, hands down, and I'm glad because I had high expectations for both and they did not disappoint. In any case, thank you for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more video reviews like this, please let me know in the comments or like the video or something because I have never done this before and I'm actually curious to see how this goes over, so all feedback is welcome. I'm just starting. I don't know if I'm going to make reviews a regular occurrence, probably not, but Persona 5 was such a special game right out the gate that I was like, I need to review this game. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you around my channel in the future.